The year was 1982, when First Lady Nancy Reagan first uttered the now famous slogan, "Just say no." Focusing all of her efforts on the education and understanding of drug abuse, the First Lady logged over 250,000 miles traveling across America and other great nations around the globe. By the autumn of 1985, Mrs. Reagan had appeared on 23 talk shows, co-hosted an episode of Good Morning America, and hosted 2 documentaries on the PBS about drug abuse. The campaign and phrase, "Just say no," made their way to pop culture history when they made their way to TV shows like Different Strokes and Punky Brewster. The biggest cultural highlight came in 1983, though, when Mrs. Reagan was visited by Mr. T during a preview of the White House Christmas decorations for the press corps. During the event, Mr. T appeared on stage dressed in Santa attire, and wore it the only way Mr. T would. After he gave his whole support to the Just Say No movement, he sat down. And as one would do when Santa is around, Mrs. Reagan sat on his lap and kissed his head. You're probably asking yourself by now, what the heck does this have to do with the terrorist organization known as Cobra? But be patient, because I'm not here to talk about the G-rated war on drugs of our childhood. No. I'm here to defend one of the most ridiculed and loathed characters in the G.I. Joe universe, Headman.
Crashing through the sky comes a fearful cry. Cobra!
Hello and welcome to Sentimental. And welcome to Cobra Convergence 3. I hope everyone has been enjoying the event so far, and I hope everyone saw yesterday's episode by Human Mechanism on the awesome Cobra vehicle, the Liquidator. And if you haven't checked it out, please do so. I'll try to include links where I can. Anyway, I don't think we can talk about the character Headman without discussing what the landscape of our childhood was in the 80s when it came to the war on drugs. Now, the Just Say No campaign was super big. It was everywhere. It appeared on TV shows, talk shows, as I said, PBS documentaries. It was even on t-shirts at a time. Now, drug dealers and users were an easy go-to villain in most TV shows and movies at the time. There were no gray areas. If you benefited from drugs in any way, shape, or form, you were evil and you needed to be put down. Now, it was only a matter of time before this appeared in comics and toys. Now, I think G.I. Joe jumped on this bandwagon a little too late, especially with the aesthetics of Headman, but we'll get into that. Now, I apologize for the long wind-up to this and talking about the Just Say No campaign, but like I said, I think that needs to be talked about to get into the mindset of how we were taught to attack drugs and be against drugs, and it was an easy villain for G.I. Joe to fight alongside with Cobra. Now, before we jump in, let me state, I'm not even a fan of Headman. I don't even have the figure, and he is on way down on my list of must-have figures. I do want him eventually, but the reason I'm defending him is because he pops up so much on the worst G.I. Joe figure posts I see online, and most terrible 80s toys altogether I've seen him pop up on. Okay, now that that's out of the way, the lists that he appears on where they bash him, which never bash a G.I. Joe figure, they're all awesome in their own way. I mean, even the Dayglow era has its place, which Headman appeared in the middle of. Now, with a backdrop of a lot of the characters with Dayglow, his outfit did stand out as being very plain. Maybe a little crazy. But we'll get into that, because in these lists, there's usually 4 themes that they attack about Headman. They are him being a drug dealer, his mask, his outfit, and his one and only appearance on the Deke cartoon series. Now, let's take a look at these 4 things in detail, shall we? First off, let's look at Headman as a drug dealer. I've already given a brief glimpse of the war on drugs during our childhood, but let's now look at Headman's file card. Now, his file card states that his name is Headman, and he's a drug kingpin. He's got a quote on here which is, "I am above the law. I rule this block. I rule this city." The Headman started out mugging old ladies for their social security checks, moved on to robbing convenience stores, then learned the ropes about drug dealing while serving time in the state penitentiary. Let's stop right there. That is a very real scenario that happened, so, actually kudos to the writer of this file card for keeping it real. Anyway, next, a hardened criminal if there ever was one. Headman wouldn't think twice about annihilating anything or anyone who gets in his way. Nothing is sacred to him. Nothing. A truly evil villain with a fixation on order and control, he created a drug empire based upon paramilitary standards with strict discipline and a rigid chain of command. Now, that kind of fits with Cobra's MO, so that's cool. The result was an organization that quickly devoured its competition and now threatens to spread its addictive poison throughout the entire world. Now, that sounds like a pretty big deal. That sounds like a real threat for G.I. Joe. So, that's pretty cool. I mean, we've always dealt with Cobra with their crazy schemes of controlling the weather, mass teleporting people in armies and cities, stealing the world's food to create hunger and to sell food at a higher price. Now, those are crazy. That's weird. But drugs, that's a pretty tangible thing to be afraid of, especially to a kid. Now, let me point out real quick. I've been discussing all this in an 80s sense. Now, the figure didn't come out until 1992. But I feel, while thinking about this character, that they may have had him on the books a little bit earlier than that, but they just waited to release him. But we'll get into that as more I defend some of the things the haters call out. Now, in the 90s, the file cards had your typical, like I read, dossier on the Cobra or G.I. Joe character. But then this Cobra, this evil headhunter figure has a G.I. Joe write-up on the bottom of it by the DEF, the Drug Elimination Force. Classified. Official communique from G.I. Joe headquarters by order of Bulletproof. DEF leader. Because the Headman is capable of invading all sectors of G.I. Joe territory undetected, it is important for you and your troops to recognize signs of infiltration by this evil drug lord. After taking the Headman's drugs, victims are unable to perform even the easiest tasks, such as tying their shoelaces. Remember to alert the nearest authorities when you spot suspicious activities. In the interest of keeping civilians informed, all enlisted personnel are directed to tell their friends and family about the importance of avoiding drugs. G.I. Joe is proud to be a member of the Partnership for a Drug-Free America. Getting back to Headman a little bit here. His soldiers, the headhunters, were very Mad Max-like, to the point where they kind of looked like Max with their helmet on and their leather getup. As I said, drugs are a more tangible thing to combat other than some of Cobra's crazy schemes. So, I think him being a drug dealer isn't that out of the ordinary for G.I. Joe to combat. Number 2 on the list is his mask. Now, okay, a domino mask is a little simple for G.I. Joe, actually. Is it that far out of the norm? No. Let's take a look at some of the other people that wore masks during this time period. A domino mask doesn't seem so crazy now, does it? And as the file card states, it's an ominous steel mask of obscurity. Now that sounds like some straight up D&D magic item stuff. I ain't hating. Number 3. Let's look at his outfit, shall we? Even in the Ultimate Guide to G.I. Joe, author Mark Bellamo called Headman the most ridiculous looking of all Cobra characters. Come on, really? Let's look at some of them. And even some G.I. Joe, for that matter. Now, this is part of my theory that Headman was created in the 80s, but just wasn't released until the 90s. Because on a popular show like Miami Vice, this type of attire wasn't that far out of the norm. There was even a time in the 80s when zoot suits made a comeback. And let's not forget another huge 80s milestone, the opening of Al Capone's vault. Now, Headman's attire calls back to that era of gangsters and mobsters. And there was a time of fascination around the time of Al Capone's vault opening and disappointment. But that even isn't that far out of the ordinary. Now, let's jump to number 4. His one and only appearance on the Deke cartoon series. Now, first off, the Deke cartoon series isn't anything to write home about. But his appearance was in Season 2, and he appeared in episodes 9 and 10, which were entitled The Greatest Evil, Part 1 and Part 2. Now, in a very after-school special type storyline, Flint's half-brother, Falcon, doesn't sound right, ended up getting hooked on drugs and tossed out of G.I. Joe, even though he was trying to rehab. To just hammer home how deadly the drug epidemic was, Cobra and G.I. Joe teamed up to take down Headman. And unfortunately, Headman has the distinction of being the only G.I. Joe villain to be killed on screen and never return. Wait a minute. We need to talk about how exactly he died. Now, running through his mountain compound/lab, Headman thought it would be a good idea to turn a hose full of drugs onto Joe and Cobra that were pursuing him. And he bumbled his way through it and ended up bathed in the stuff himself. They take time to point out many times that he has died from an overdose. But at the last minute, he hops up, pushes a self-destruct button, and then keels over. So the mountain base blows up, but he was dead before that, so they doubly killed him. Anyway, back to the show. Now, I can defend 1, 2, and 3, but number 4 is kinda hard to defend because A, it is the Deke series, and B, yeah, brother got played. Anyway, I hope one little thing that I said might change your mind to Headman. If you're even a hater of him. I mean, I'm sure he has fans out there because there's kids that grew up with that G.I. Joe. They grew up with the Eco Force and the Drug Elimination Force as their G.I. Joe. They, the Dayglow G.I. Joe is their G.I. Joe, just like the originals are our G.I. Joes. And I speak in ours as everyone my age, and older, I'm sure. But to say that he is the worst of worst Cobra characters, I mean, there's hundreds of Cobra figures out there, hundreds of different characters, but to single one out as the worst, I think that's pretty harsh. I mean, as I've said, no G.I. Joe character is bad. They're all great in their own way, because they all have a piece in our nostalgia, in our history, and who we are today as G.I. Joe fans. So, cut the man some slack. Drugs are a pretty big threat, and it was pretty heady of G.I. Joe to take on that threat. I mean, that's some pretty grown-up stuff for the era. When you're dealing with Cobra threatening to give you bad weather if you don't pay up. So, drugs, bad. Bad weather, we're living with it now. So anyway, thanks for watching Sentimental, and stay tuned tomorrow for the man himself. Hooded Cobra Commander 788 tackles the Toxo Viper. So, enjoy. Catch you next time. Keep being rad, stay dorky. Peace. Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit the subscribe button for some more awesome videos. We also have a couple here on the side you might be interested in. And until next time, thanks for watching, keep being rad, and stay dorky.